welcome back to another video of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I am in Las Vegas, and as you might see from the site here, we are just outside McCarran Airport, and I'm actually at a place where I've never been before, and that is the famous "Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada" sign. The sign actually was installed in 1959 and has a pretty interesting history. In fact, is a national historic place, so it definitely attracts a lot of people. And as you can see here, I'll show some images, but there is a series of signs outside, just outside this area, that has the parking, and so everybody just pulls in here and parks. There are buses unloaded, and it's kind of one of those rare moments maybe you'd only see in Las Vegas, in the sense that there are signs leading you to the sign, and there are parking signs leading you to the sign. So it's one of those things that clearly is maybe something you only see in Las Vegas. And the purpose of my visit to Vegas actually this week for 3 days is to really try to do a series of videos, a retrospective on the Strip, to really focus on the Strip in terms of a number of areas. And what we'll try to do is, as you can see from here, we're at the sign, and then we're going to walk all the way down from Mandalay as far as we can go north, and it probably will take us a couple days to do this, for sure. But the hope is to really combine some stuff I've done in the past in terms of video, and also in terms of some musical experiments, some publications. I will read you some reflections along the way, and I'm just looking at the sign here. And let's see, you can kind of get a sense of how significant the sign is. Again, 1959, National Register of Historic Places. And what I'm doing, as I typically do, is take a series of photos with a variety of different cameras. So we can spin around here a little bit. It's one of these things that if you know how far the sign is, here's another one here, which is kind of cool. Welcome, enjoy your visit to the sign. If you're a French post-structuralist, you'd have quite a bit of fun with a lot of this. Anyone can take a photo. There are no designated photographers, no business, no reserved times, first in time, first in line. But if you were a semiotician, of course, you would talk about signs in a much different sense. I mean, a sign like this one is a sign, of course, in the sense that semioticians, talk about signs, but not in the way we typically think of signs. And I think just, one of the curious things about it is to get from here to Mandalay, if you're walking, it is definitely a haul. So it's the kind of thing that if you really want to come out and see the Las Vegas sign, probably have to take the Deuce, and there is a Deuce bus stop just actually over here. The southbound, and the northbound is back on this side right here. But it is a haul, and on a day like this where it's going to be 108, definitely probably a day to take the bus. And I think one of the purposes of beginning here is A, I've never been to the Las Vegas sign, and B, is to think about the nature of the image. And as we begin the tour of the Strip, thinking about the image, we have, in a sense, a very literal image here. And you're reminded, probably as I am, of like theme parks where you have a Kodak picture spot. And actually, I think they're no longer Kodak picture spots. Those have since changed. But a lot of theme parks will specifically have designated places where people take photos, and so obviously in this case it's an opportunity for people to do the same. And it's one of the things, as we start our trip down the Strip, as we move northwards, we will certainly talk about all the images available for us as consumers, as visitors to these iconic signs on the Strip. And again, we're using semiotics here, or signs in the sense of semiotic theory. Think of Charles Peirce and Luxor and Roland Barthes and others who have really pioneered semiotic studies, the study of signs. They would certainly inspire us to think about the nature of how these kinds of image opportunities are created for us. It was Saussure, of course, that talked about the arbitrary connection between a signifier and the signified, between something that signifies and that which is signified by that thing. And when we come to Las Vegas, we think about, as people honk here, we think about the arbitrariness of the images that we see. There's familiarity for sure. We're going to look at some of the more familiar semiotic constructs out here in terms of pyramids and Eiffel Towers and waterfalls and all the complex representations on the Las Vegas Strip that make it famous and infamous. And indeed infamous because a lot of cultural critics, as we'll talk about in our trip up and down the Strip, have identified serious concerns about the nature of the very thing that we see happening before our eyes. The nature of people posing in front of these signs, taking a pilgrimage to a sign, following the signs to get to the sign, seeing the showgirls, taking pictures of the showgirls and so forth. So it's one of those things, certainly, as we begin our trip down the Strip, we want to think about exactly what to make of the spectacle before us. And as we think of images are a curious thing when we think about travel, and it doesn't have to be to Las Vegas, but anywhere that we might go, and we take a snapshot of something, and then we imbue in us that memory of that image. We sort of burns in our consciousness. We use it, we reuse it over time. But I think it always comes back to, the initial question of why are some images more fascinating to us than others? So if we just pan away from the Las Vegas sign and we look at McCarran Airport, no, I'm actually the only one here. No one else I've seen this whole time is taking any video or any still shots of McCarran Airport, right? So clearly, as we think about the horizon here and seeing the planes take off, there's nothing here that is marked by our culture, by our entertainment and leisure industry as significant. This is a functional space. And then we get here, and it's a representational space. The showgirls are not standing on this side of the street and they're hanging out by the airport, right? So there's a construct here as part of this entire, semiotic, symbolic complex, the significance of it. And obviously, some of this is, on its surface, fairly obvious to us as what's happening here, but it's an opportunity to really reflect on what is transpiring when we embark on a journey like the one we're embarking on now, and we partake in these collections of images. All these people standing here, snapping shots of the Las Vegas sign, right, intentionally. We'll take these images, we'll do something with them. In a lot of cases, the way digital photography works today, we don't necessarily even look at all the images that we have. I think about my Flickr site. Flickr kind of changed hands, my Google Photos site, and I have over, I think, close to 50,000 images. And in my case, I'm using a lot of these for research purposes. But there are a lot of cases where we, as tourists and travelers, we snap these images, we see the significance of certain places, we see the significance of the image, we're a part of that image taking, and yet at the same time, we sometimes actually don't even use the images or look at those images. So I think just a lot to think about as we start to move our way down the Strip and reflect on what exactly some of these images mean to us. And of course, most people, when they take their images of the sign, don't take it from this perspective or even the back. If I didn't want to stay in line, you know what I would do? I would actually just stand right here because there's a line like over 20 back, and I would take my shot from this perspective, right? But even this side of the sign, right, doesn't have that significance. This is, you know, the sense of heading out this way towards, I believe, Red Rock, which is an amazing park that certainly you can check out if you are desirous of getting away from the casinos and the strip itself. But no one is on this side taking a picture. So this clearly has significance of traffic leaving town and people saying goodbye to the strip, whereas this side, around the other side, is the significance of people essentially beginning their pilgrimage here in Las Vegas. I mean, it has that look of a very like historic sign, but if you think about it in terms of scale compared to most things in Las Vegas, it's not super spectacular. I mean, you have the AstroTurf here. Part of my view is probably tempered by the fact that it is really hot. It's pushing 100 degrees right now. So I think we're going to think about maybe heading out and continuing the tour northwards down the strip. But as we leave the Las Vegas sign, we clearly may want to think about the nature of the image as we continue our tour with other images down Las Vegas Boulevard of various sorts. Okay, as we look at some of the footage I took during my visit in 2019, I'm focusing on the themes of nature and symbolic place. And I've actually considered a few of these in the past. I've looked at the Shark Reef Aquarium, the video symbolic theming, and also theming development. I also featured Mandalay in my favorite themes. And by the way, if you're interested in looking at these in retrospection, you can just simply go to my YouTube. Here's one on the Delano, which is connected to Mandalay Bay. You can go to my YouTube and search by the title, or you could search by the name Mandalay Bay or Vegas, and it should come up. So I'm contrasting here the exterior images of nature with some of the shots on the interior. And over the years, you know, Mandalay Bay has certainly developed. I recall staying there many years ago, probably close to 20 years, and really enjoying the pool area, really enjoying some of that scene, which I think really did take advantage or does take advantage of nature in the sense of water, in the sense of leisure connected to water. And you see examples of this throughout with the various fountains, indoors and outdoors. When you go inside, you have some of the more interesting restaurants, I think, around, some really great architecture. And you just have, I think, examples of a very large complex of theming, a casino space that takes advantage of both the interior and the exterior spaces. In some of my previous videos, I've talked about this idea of symbolic place, discussing how Mandalay Bay does not use a literal connection of place back to Burma or Myanmar. It uses almost a mythical notion of place. And it's an interesting idea to think about this tropical Asian theme and how it's developed over the various spaces of the Mandalay Bay. And I'm just spinning around here outside, showing you a little more of my footage. I've shot this, by the way, on the DJI Pocket Osmo, which I think has done some great work for me this time around in terms of giving me some really stable footage. I've done a little work in post-production on the color grading and exposure and so forth. And I think there's just a lot to take in Mandalay Bay. And it's such a contrast if you compare it to New York, or the Venetian. You just think about the mood of the guest when they're in a space like this and how different it likely is compared to those other spaces, depending on the energy. The Hard Rock Hotel, as an example, versus, or the Palms, versus Mandalay Bay. Okay, so I'm here at the Luxor just before I make my way to the Excalibur, and as you can see next to me here, we actually have hieroglyphs. And if you know anything about the Luxor, it opened in 1993, and was part of that 90s theming boom, which had a lot of representational theming. And in 2007 began a process of really what some have called de-theming that took place, where essentially a lot of the Egyptian theming goes away. And we notice that really here you see some remnants of it with this Egyptian room here, and again some of the hieroglyphs behind me. But the shops just back that way used to actually have a lot more of the King Tutankhamun theme and the Egyptian theming, and you just see it really in a few places left. So you see it near the registration desk, kind of they left those the statuary figures there, and then as I said, some of the hieroglyphs here. You also see up on the ceiling just back there. So it's a reminder, I think, a little bit of the issue of history as we think about Las Vegas. And the curious thing about the Luxor is that the Luxor, of course, purports to use history as a theme, the idea of ancient Egyptian society, archaeological digs, and all the like. And of course, over time, as that is de-themed, you have, a historical effect of the casino changing, but the question becomes, what time is changing? Is it the time of the past that it references, or is it the time of the less distant past that is the actual sort of time that we experienced through the casino since 1993? So that point in 2007 where the de-theming starts, we really do get a different feel for the past and what it represents, leaving the past behind, as it were, which seems too overly contradictory, because we're in a casino that I think, to some extent over time has celebrated the idea of the past and the idea of history. The other thing I think we think about here at the Luxor is the idea of the story, and to what extent stories are told in Las Vegas casinos and how those stories change over time. I think it's interesting to think about a casino based on the idea of a past civilization in Egypt, but it also is probably challenging today, in today's day and age, to brand disparate elements like Starbucks, which is just down the way here, and other restaurants and so forth, the Titanic exhibit. It almost becomes contradictory when you think about all these different images and memes and things being juxtaposed within the space. So it's kind of challenging to think about. But it just reminds us that the story told in Las Vegas is paramount, but we have to really get down into the depths of what we're looking at and consider what exactly is possible in terms of storytelling. A lot of the casinos in Vegas, it seems to me, have a story or a narrative, but there's a superficiality or lack of depth of the story. You never, for example, stepped inside the Luxor and got an actual tale of Egyptian society, of King Tut, of the past, of Egyptian culture, of religion and civilization. So it's clearly an example of using a story sort of at a more minimal level, just to give us the bits and pieces to provide the ambiance and the sense of place that is necessary for forms of representational theming that we see in Las Vegas. Okay, jumping back to some post-production voiceover, just to reminisce a little bit. Here's the shot from 2019 of the hieroglyphs. If you're curious about my previous work, check out these 3 videos: De-theming Again, Luxor Las Vegas, The Great Beam of Light, and Retheming 5, the Luxor. These are shorter videos shot a really long time ago, 5 to 6 years ago, looking at some of my Luxor work then. And there's another one as well that was a second Egyptomania video, this one, and this I look at quite a few different spaces, including the Luxor. Egyptomania 1 was focused on Universal Studios Singapore, which has a really extensive Egyptian theme to it. So I think for me, what's really a great exercise in looking at history, or really any topic on this Vegas trip, is to think about just like what is changing over time. And this is some of my footage from the Luxor, actually walking in from the shops into the main area where we're going to see the the Sphinx and so forth. And for me, one of the things that is fascinating about the Luxor is just that change in theming that's happened over a relatively short period of time. I remember back in the day going to the Luxor, and the draw was like the cool inclinators, those really awesome, you see them just above there, the rooms. They're like elevators that take you 45 degrees at this angle. I always am reminded of this space with the rooms of the contemporary resort of all places at Walt Disney World, just in terms of like the drama of the atrium, this area where you can see all the rooms from the center focal point. Just kind of a reminder for me. The other thing that is interesting about the Luxor when it first opened was there was these boats that took people, and I think that had a real like performative element to it. The rumor was, and I never saw those boats, but that it just was simply too slow and slowed down the check-in process. But I think for me it would be interesting if they actually took some of the theming and went back in time, like started doing, like did a reboot and said, we can't do anything about the pyramid. And some of my videos I've joked about a conversation I had with some folks about that very fact, but they've kept some of it. And like, I can't imagine if they just took out this center feature and just said, we're going to do away with the statue and the obelisk, you know, what would be left of the Luxor? And as they're filling in these interior spaces, the Titanic, the bodies exhibit, other things start to take over that theme and push that theme out of the way. And I can only imagine that designers and folks at MGM decided that this theme was no longer resonating with people. But if you think about it, it has a uniqueness, and it is one of those, maybe you could argue Caesar's is as well, that has like ancient history, ancient civilization, the past, as a theme that I think could be exploited in some very interesting ways. And even in the past, there was, rides here, virtual reality rides that took into account like some of the archaeology in the ancient past and so forth. But as you see Diablos, as you see some of the theming go away as you move through the casino, it becomes an interesting exercise to think about what the possibilities might be in the future in terms of taking it in a new direction. Again, look at just what you see here. You're really reminded more of other brands and other themes and other topics, and less of this theme of Egypt, the focus on Egyptomania, the focus on history, and so forth. Okay, as we continue the tour and the focus on retrospection and the past of Luxor's past, meant in multiple senses, I actually found this Luxor commercial from 1993 that I hadn't seen before, so I want to play it for you now to give a little bit more context about the nature of the change that we're talking about here at the Luxor.
The year 1922. The place, Egypt's remote Valley of the Kings. An unknown archaeologist named Howard Carter has discovered the tomb of the child pharaoh Tutankhamun. As he chips a hole through the end of the passageway, Howard Carter is asked, "Do you see anything?" "Yes," he replies, "wonderful things." If only he had lived to see this. Luxor, Las Vegas, the world's only pyramid-shaped hotel, casino, and entertainment complex, and a discovery not unlike the one Carter explored in 1922. Only this discovery you must explore yourself. Within Luxor, you can voyage back 3,000 years on the River Nile, past elaborate murals illustrating the rich history of the ancient Egyptian empire, and look upon the seated Ramses of Abu Simbel. Much the way Howard Carter looked upon the elaborate and beautiful treasures in King Tut's tomb. There he found 4 rooms carved from solid rock: the antechamber, the annex, the burial chamber, and the treasury. It seemed as if the wealth of a nation was buried with its king, for everywhere he looked, he saw the glint of gold. There are mountains of treasure within Luxor's immense subterranean casino as well. Here you'll find everything from slot and video machines to gaming tables, a poker room, a keno lounge, and a race and sports book. And with a gold chamber card membership, you can earn bonus treasure as well. With treasure comes adventure, and you'll find plenty at Luxor's trilogy of cutting-edge special effects attractions. in search of the obelisk, a wild chase through a mysterious underground pyramid, Luxor Live, an out-of-this-world talk show where you will behold a fabulous 3D solar eclipse, and The Theater of Time, a magical glimpse into 3 alternative visions of the future. For the latest in virtual reality toys, make a special trip to Virtual Land. Just look for the neon lights at the entrance. Howard Carter painstakingly removed artifacts from the entrance of King Tut's tomb. Among the first were dozens of alabaster jars thought to store drink. The ancient Egyptians believed a pharaoh had to wait before ascending to the next world and pack their tombs with enough food to last an eternity. Within Luxor, you won't go hungry either. 7 sumptuous restaurants and 7 enchanting lounges stand ready to indulge your every culinary whim. You can feast on international dishes and desserts at the Manhattan Buffet. Take a break from the casino action at the Obelisk Bar. Enjoy fresh baked goods at the Pyramid Cafe, or nosh kosher style at the Nile Deli. Live entertainment and cocktails await you in Nefertiti's Lounge. Millennium is the place to go for modern-day favorites, while the Millennium Bar offers out-of-this-world libations. And you'll find your favorite ice cream at Swenson's. For Polynesian, Szechuan, Mandarin, and Cantonese, dine in the tropical paradise of Papyrus, or savor an island drink at Tut's Hut. But if nothing but the finest will do, relax to the elegant strains of a harpist in the Anteroom Lounge. Choose from oceans of fresh fish at the Sacred Sea Room. Or spoil yourself in the unparalleled fine dining of Isis. To feast your eyes, treat yourself to a performance of Winds of the Gods. You'll witness a cast of 65 avenge the desecration of a pharaoh's tomb by thieves. King Tut's tomb had also been defiled by thieves, but Howard Carter still found priceless clues to Egyptian life in the past, such as this replica of the golden fan used to cool Tutankhamun as he enjoyed his life of unsurpassed luxury. At Luxor, you'll feel like a pharaoh in our men's and women's health spa, where you can pamper yourself with a massage, rejuvenate with some stress-relieving exercise, unwind in the whirlpool, or simply swim. Luxor is home to one of the largest outdoor pools in Las Vegas, complete with private cabanas. At Christina's Salon, you'll also get royal treatment and a fashionable new haircut, manicure, or soothing pedicure. There's always the modern way to relax, shopping, at stores like the Scarab Shop, Park Avenue Shop, and Sobek Sundries. You'll find everything from unique Egyptian gifts to Luxor's very own brand of perfume, while the Source Museum Shop offers replicas of the art and jewelry in King Tut's tomb. During the years of examining King Tut's tomb, hundreds of photographs and drawings were made, which is how, within Luxor, we were able to create an exact replica of the tomb, including beautiful recreations of the art, jewelry, and other treasures Howard Carter discovered many years ago. As you make your way through the many levels and many worlds of Luxor, you'll discover thousands of treasures like these. But most of all, you'll discover that Luxor is more than a casino, more than a spectacular hotel, even more than a monumental collection of entertainment and attractions, the likes of which the world has never seen before. It's Luxor, the next wonder of the world.
Okay, as we leave that historic video from the 90s, I think you see just how dramatic the transformation has been in terms of the interior of the Luxor. Again, the exterior is basically the same, other than I think using it more as a billboard has been common practice in the last 10 or 15 or so years. But the inside is pretty dramatic and pretty different, and we see these rare glimpses to the right here of some of the statuary, some of the Egyptian theme that is maintained. And so I thought it might be useful right now to jump to my historic Luxor images combined with my contemporary ones to take you through a sense of the transformation that we're talking about here. Okay, so here we have it. This is my entire collection of Luxor images, and some of these you'll note are not like rotated the right way, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what has come to pass in terms of this dramatic transformation that I'm speaking of. And I had a chance to look at this image here, and I looked up the El Rancho, and actually there were two El Ranchos, but this particular one closed in 2000. So I know that my images are probably 2000 or before. I'm just trying to remember. I want to say like late 90s I went to the Luxor in Las Vegas. I'm trying to remember. It might have been like 98 or 99. So you're seeing a lot of the old stuff, and again, this is the stuff that is no longer with us. So some of this here, the hieroglyphs that you'll note, a lot of this was from the room, and in particular you'll see that they had hieroglyphs on the bed, they had it on the bedspread, on the backboard. Pretty dramatic focus on Egyptian theming. Also, I really like the toiletries they had. I wish I'd saved some of these actually, but they had the pyramid, Luxor, and you can see here the iconography all over the soaps and so forth. More from the bedding. These are the exterior, and a lot of this has remained the same. It's where the interior stuff happens that we see some transformation. So a lot of the statuary have disappeared. The exception is near the front desk area, where a lot of, at least some of that has been maintained over the years. The Cairo Bazaar, these murals, those are all gone. This area here, which I have some video that you've seen in this video today from 2019, they've stripped a lot of this to the right, which is the Luxor theming. All these icons, the signage, which also had that kind of Egyptian flair to it. This is also from the inside of that bazaar area. You could see here King Tut's chariot. So all the displays in here, which had a real museal quality to them, like a museum, all this stuff is gone. I can't recall if some of this exterior stuff is no longer with us. I'd have to look. Ra, the nightclub, is gone. So if you had a chance to see that video from 93, they really, we can say some of it is potentially offensive in terms of the parallels to Carter and the archaeological digs and so forth, but they really made an effort to try to take this Egyptian theme and spread it throughout the material culture, the architecture, the decor, inside the rooms, outside the rooms, the lobby. A lot of the nightclubs, a lot of the restaurants had a theme connected to Egypt. If you remember that one little comment in there about the Szechuan restaurant, clearly even in the mid-90s, Luxor wasn't necessarily totally consistent in terms of its themes. But radical transformation on the inside. When that transformation happened, I remember, and I don't have the date of this image, but sometime in the 2000s, you started to see venues like this and Liquidity and Aurora, and basically a movement away from that Egyptian theme. The hieroglyphs become less common over time, and you see more of this, the artifact exhibit, and for a while Jabberwockies was here. I believe they're at MGM now. A lot of the groups and performers move around. This is another site of the interior that is no longer there, of the camel. A lot of this has changed too. I believe that's become a convention area and is no longer Zippo and no longer is a store there, but a lot of this theming has been stripped away. More statuary here that are gone. And you're just getting a real melange here, a combination of images over time. I don't have the dates on these, but I wanted to show you this just to give you a sense of how things have changed. The food court, you could probably see some of the buildings they maintained, but they brought in more brands like Nathan's and burger joints and so forth, and took away a lot of those Egyptian-themed restaurants or restaurants that connected to that Egyptian theme. This is also from Ra, the nightclub. And you can see it here, some of the signage. So I don't know what you think of the transformation, but for me, this version of the Luxor is much more interesting, just when they really did take the Egyptian theme and run with it and embellish it and transform the theme throughout the casino and its various venues. So as I was saying today in my earlier commentary, I would really like to see a movement back, perhaps, in terms of bringing back some of this Egyptian theme, perhaps with a reboot of it. We'll have to see what happens with the Sahara, because the Sahara is one of the first examples of going from a 1.0 version to a new hotel casino, the SLS, to a 2.0 version after going to another theme. The Aladdin, of course, went from 1.0 to 2.0 right away, and then eventually into the Planet Hollywood. So we'll have to see what will come in the future in terms of any transformations of the Luxor and its theming. So what I'm going to do is actually just make my way down the escalators here into the Excalibur to explore further, and to just take a look at that sense of loss as we perhaps reflect on the past and see the disappearance of the Egyptian theme here at the Luxor in Las Vegas. Okay, so we're leaving New York behind, and I thought we could just spin around since we're so close to our next casino just across the way. And if you know your Las Vegas geography, you probably know which casino this is going to be. And that is the Excalibur. And the focus on the Excalibur today is going to be on the idea of ersatz, specifically ersatz architecture. And it's not necessarily to think of it in the sense that we are necessarily poking fun at it or suggesting that it's not significant, but I think what the Excalibur has always represented to some extent is a look that suggests that it's something that's not quite a representation, maybe from the ground up, just the way it looks, right? It's exaggeration of scale. When the Aladdin, the second Aladdin opened up, actually, a lot of people talked about that same issue with some of the interior and exterior features in terms of scale, in terms of the details, and so forth. So I think as we talk about ersatz architecture, we can think about the significance of this type of architecture as it's represented maybe in our imagination. So let's begin that tour. Okay, so if you're interested in checking out my previous videos on the Excalibur, you can check out the main ones, What's in a Theme, and then also Retheming 4, which is a shorter video. So as I was describing in the earlier Luxor video, I'm just taking the escalator here through the Luxor. We're seeing the theming change. I've sped this up to twice the speed. And as we're going along, we're seeing the movement away, obviously, from the Luxor theme, and then you're just getting some of the signage here of the Excalibur. I think the Excalibur, for me, has always been one of those throwback casinos because of the fact that they have a theme that seems so dated and sort of wrapped up in the past in terms of King Arthur, knights, and everything that maybe is associated with this particular theme. Alright, as I did with the Luxor, I wanted to take you through my images from my Google Photos. These date back to 2005. I'm thinking maybe a few of these Excalibur photos were before that. I don't unfortunately have the dates on all these, but again, it gives you a sense of just like some of the transformation. So I think a lot of what you see in the old Excalibur theme, like with the kids focus with the dragon here, a lot of that has gone away. The facade has stayed the same, although the Merlin and some of the associated characters with Merlin, wizards, knights, and so forth, some of that exterior stuff has also gone away. This image here in particular is showing you what it used to look like when there was a show out right outside the Excalibur. And here is Merlin here in the tower, and man, that's an old photo of me. I'm trying to see when this was. This is also the old water show, and these are not my images, but if you look at this image here, it's Merlin coming out of that little vestibule area, and then there was also a dragon, and I think that was discontinued in 2004. Unfortunately, I don't have any video of that, but it was one of those attempts like the Mirage, the Bellagio volcano. Of course, this was before much of that, and particularly the Bellagio. It was an attempt to create an outdoor spectacle, the TI as well, Treasure Island, and the Pirate Show. So I think, over time they've moved away from maybe what is this association with a more childlike theme. And the question with the Luxor is, where is that going to take them? What possibly can they do with this theme over time, particularly if guests are no longer interested in some of the association with, dragons, Merlin, wizards, and the kind of stuff that is a part of the theming, that it's really hard to move away from this. When this is your exterior facade, it's a challenge to, as the case with Luxor, erase that, right? There's no obvious way to do it. As I mentioned with some of the work on Aladdin in terms of the theming, I think the proportions always, it's questionable when you look at what was done in the exterior and even some of the interior with the lamps and some of the lighting. I just think it has that look of ersatz, and ersatz is not necessarily a bad thing. Artificiality is not always a bad thing. If you create a fantasy world, it can be an effective way to connect with the guests. But my question about the Excalibur going forward is, how can they embellish this theme? Can they move forward in some new directions to make it more sophisticated or more interesting to guests? And time will tell the tale here in terms of what happens. Okay, as we leave Excalibur, I thought we might make a short diversion to talk about the Tropicana. I didn't have a chance to go to the Tropicana in 2019. I just had too much on my plate as far as the other casinos that you're seeing. You can check out my video called A New Direction Tropicana Las Vegas. Pretty short video, but in that one I profile some of the changes that took place over the years. And you're seeing here initially some of the older images, and these kind of reflect the theme of the time back when the Tropicana was a much different casino. And it's worth noting that the Tropicana opened in 1957, so it certainly is one of the Strip's oldest hotels. In 2009, it went through major renovations, and some of the images will be coming up here that show you the scale of the change, moving from the Cuban theme to a more South Beach one. The Tropicana for me was always one of those casinos, or is one of those casinos, that doesn't have an explicit theme in terms of how it's developed over time and in its various spaces. Now, one of the things I miss about the Tropicana, and over a series of years into the 2000s, there were various museums on site. Museums that featured images like this one, which was all the explosions and implosions of casinos. The history of the mob, a focus on casinos that had gone defunct over the years. And unfortunately, that focus on a museum approach went away. And it's one of the, I think, disappointing things for me on the Strip, that there isn't more interest in museums within the casinos. Of course, outside the Strip, you do get the Mob Museum, which is very popular with tourists. Spin around a bit and go to the MGM Grand. And the MGM, used to have a much different look to it. I'm seeing it right here. And specifically the entrance, a Lions entrance, was modified over the years. And MGM opened in 1993, and shortly after opening into the mid-90s and then well into the early 2000s, there were some pretty significant changes that took place. And just to get you up to speed, I've done a few videos over the years on the MGM. The first one here is focused on the Astonishing World campaign that the MGM was a part of with the other resorts. And then also I discussed the modern approach to theming, which I think is the closest I get to talking about the transformation in theming that took place over time. I've chosen to focus on the main foundation of this video with the MGM on the idea of the theme park. And it might seem strange to you, but I'm referring to the MGM Grand Adventures theme park, which was just behind the casino. Now it's the signature back there, and this ran from 1993 to 2002. And for me, the theme park, along with the old Oz theming, there was the Wizard of Oz diorama, there was a yellow brick road that led to the Grand Adventures theme park. It was really trying to cater to a clientele much opposite from that current theme of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, because a lot of people, I think today, would say Vegas is really not an appropriate place to take children. And so I think as the MGM began to move away from that theme, it had to really think about how to jettison the theme park in it, if you will. So removing the Wizard of Oz, Yellow Brick Road stuff, eventually removing the theme park in 2002. For me, it was an interesting experiment, but I'm not sure that it's one that could have sustained itself for much longer than it did. Okay, we're looking at a little more of my footage I shot in 2019, and as I mentioned, looking back at the past, the MGM Grand was certainly a much different casino if you look at the old Lion entrance. And I had heard that it was considered bad luck for some gamblers, and so I think maybe that played some role in shifting the entrance to what it is today. This is one of my shots from the lion habitat, and for a while, the MGM lion theming, we had the indoor zoo area, which I always thought was pretty cool. I mean, it was a unique thing to have that on the Strip. There are only a few places I can think of. The Mirage comes to mind. Mandalay Bay being another one with its aquarium and Komodo dragons and so forth. And I heard recently that the new Resorts World, which would hopefully open up in a couple years, may have some indoor panda exhibits. We'll have to see. You're looking at some images here of the Art Deco, and I actually think the Art Deco look that they've chosen is pretty cool. It sort of harkens back to this old Hollywood style. I think as a theme goes, it's kind of neat, and it's not as dramatic as maybe the Wizard of Oz was in the past. And by the way, if you're curious to look that up, there's someone on YouTube who has a video, actually an entire walkthrough of the Wizard of Oz diorama. I'm actually pointing out some stuff in this video, and actually I did a voiceover, but the audio was pretty bad, so I'm redoing it. This is their current 21 up, I think it's called, their arcade section in the MGM Grand. And it's another sign, like with Centrifuge here, of jettisoning that more childlike themes of the past, of lions, of the theme park of the Wizard of Oz and going with a more modern, hip aesthetic. And yes, I think overall it works. I mean, Centrifuge is a pretty impressive looking bar, but I start to worry that a number of the casinos on the Strip start to look like one another. You could exchange the Centrifuge bar with a bar in the Aria or in the Cosmopolitan and so forth. Even recently when I was touring the Mirage, I thought, wow, some of these spaces are really nice and hip and up to date and aesthetically pleasing, but they all start to look the same to some degree in my opinion. So as we begin our look at New York here, I'm trying to get the replica Statue of Liberty in focus here. Actually, the Statue of Liberty here is a pretty good icon to be talking about or looking at as we consider this part of the journey. And the theme or foundation I'm looking at for this segment is simulation, or the simulacrum. And the story that's probably relevant here is that in 2010, the U.S. produced a forever stamp that was going to have the face of the Statue of Liberty on it, and did have the face of the Statue of Liberty on it. The problem was that, if you see it as a problem, was that the Postal Service had mistakenly used a graphic image of the New York's Statue of Liberty. And so it became, kind of a bit of a joke, I guess you could say, or something that was funny for many people who study simulation, because the idea, going back to Jean Baudrillard's work about simulation, was of course that eventually the thing that is representing reality would supplant reality. So the artificial or simulated Statue of Liberty would, in some ways, replace the actual, reality of the Statue of Liberty, the original version. And of course, there have been multiple statues of Liberty all over the world, and so it's not like it's the only one. But when you think about this mix-up, it does say something, I think, about the nature of simulation and why simulation is so important. Perhaps in this look at New York here in 2019. The other thing I would say is that at the same time, although critics often look at simulation as an issue in society, the other thing we could talk about is that simulation can be meaningful. And actually, we're in this space right now where up until 2013 was the 9/11 memorial. And so in this area along here, we actually used to have a memorial to the victims of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And so I think that was, indication perhaps of the fact that people can use a place like the New York and Las Vegas, a simulation of New York City, as a place to pay homage to victims of terrible tragedies and events like the September 11th terrorist attacks. So it does balance at least that perspective that simulation cannot be significant to people or interesting to people. I've always made the point that we should get away from those simplicities of seeing a dichotomous situation that there's a copy and an original. I mean, the world simply doesn't work through one copy and one original. So it's important maybe to think about in terms of perspective. So let's begin this tour of New York. New York today in 2019. The whole area by the Statue of Liberty has been redesigned down that way. And of course, I've made reference to the fact that in many of my videos that they took out the September 11th memorial, which I actually thought was like a pretty cool space to have. But who knows the decision. They've reworked a lot of the areas. I actually love this entrance area. I think it's pretty cool what they've done with the Statue of Liberty, building on that sort of as a brand, and I like just the use of the lit up signs and the fonts and so forth. And we've got some mist coming out. I mean, it's just a real nice scene if you look at it right here. The area by the bridge here, they've like redesigned. They've turned it into a public space, so it's kind of nice, opening up a little more, and this flows real nice with the park that is just around the corner there past Steak Shack. So I like the fact that they've done a little more here with public space at New York. Okay, we'll leave my on-site commentary and we'll move right inside, which is one of my favorite spaces of New York, New York. And if you're keeping track, I have done a slew of videos on the casino, on everything ranging from social media to the city theming to many other areas, changes in the casino, changes with the architecture, the facade, and so forth. So this is clearly one of my favorite spaces, and this is the actual casino I stayed at in 2019. I think I've stayed at New York 4 or 5 times, I'm not sure. It's just one of my favorite spaces. I've always enjoyed it, and I think part of that is because it has such an explicit city theme to it. In fact, I was reading recent literature I found in the room, and they were actually focusing on the very fact that it was, according to them, the first city-themed hotel casino in Las Vegas. So I thought it was kind of cool that they were drawing on this for their argument about like the authenticity of the casino and so forth. And so we'll leave the inside and go outside here a little bit now.